Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has acknowledged that Ukraine's military is currently unable to reclaim Crimea and the Donbas region from Russian occupation. Speaking to a French newspaper, Zelensky said that Ukraine's armed forces do not have the capability to oust Russian troops from occupied areas. He emphasized, however, that diplomatic pressure from the international community is the only viable option to push Moscow into negotiations. Zelensky told the French newspaper that Ukraine cannot just give up their territories and the Ukrainian constitution forbids them to do so, admitting, quote-unquote, de facto these territories are now controlled by the Russians. That's a huge admission. And that Ukraine does not have the strength to recover them, adding that Ukraine can only count on diplomatic pressure from the international community to force Russian President Vladimir Putin to sit down at the negotiating table. Russia annexed Crimea in 2014 and has since taken control of around 80% of the Donbas region, including the Donetsk and Luhansk areas. In addition, Russian forces occupy parts of the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. A Ukrainian counter-offensive launched last year with the backing of Western military aid has failed to dislodge the Russian forces from these regions. Zelensky's comments have reportedly sparked debates about the future of Ukraine's territorial claims. Just last month, Zelensky said that Ukraine might abandon its goal of reclaiming these territories through military force if NATO membership was offered in return. However, the NATO has only confirmed that Ukraine will eventually be invited to join the alliance without specifying a timeline. In the year 2022, Zelensky issued a decree barring peace talks with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Yet in his latest remarks, he said this stance may be subject to change. It's not about who sits across from you, it's about the position you are in when negotiating, quote unquote. Further quoting, I don't believe we are in a weak position, but we are also not in a strong one. That's what Zelensky further emphasized, emphasizing the importance of a peace plan, basically, adding that first Ukraine needs to develop a model, an action plan, which can be presented to Putin or more broadly to the Russian people. Meanwhile, former U.S. official Keith Kellogg, who will be the key advisor to President-elect Donald Trump, co-authored a plan before the November election. The plan basically proposed freezing the front line, suspending NATO membership discussions for Ukraine, and partially lifting Western sanctions on Russia. Under this proposal, the U.S. would basically continue military support for Ukraine but would cut off aid if Zelensky refused to engage in peace talks. The Kremlin has made it clear, meanwhile, that peace is only possible if Ukraine agrees to surrender Crimea and the other 4 regions Russia claims as its own. Moscow's conditions including Ukraine withdrawing its forces from the cities of Kherson and Zaporizhia, which had a combined pre-war population of around 1 million people. Dmitry Peskov, the press secretary for Putin, has said that Russia does not want a ceasefire. It wants peace only after its conditions are met and all its goals are achieved. As the conflict drags on, Zelensky's admission marks a huge shift in Ukraine's strategy in a way and raises crucial questions about the path forward in its ongoing struggle against Russia. Our next story is about the school terror in the United States. The numbers are frightening. The impact of the gun terror is a horror story. And the worst part, it's impacting children. And they don't deserve this. Not at all. Let me first tell you about the latest act of violence. Late Monday morning, as you would know by now, gunfire erupted at a school in Wisconsin's capital city. The shooter opened fire, killing another student and a teacher, and wounding 6 others. The teacher and student were pronounced dead at the school. The shooter also died. What do we know about the shooter? Now, that's the other part of this horror story. And here's why we're saying that. The shooter was a 15-year-old student. The shooter, identified by the police as Natalie Rupno, who also went by Samantha, was a student at the school. What prompted a student, a 15-year-old, to open fire? Also, you must know, in one way, the Madison attack is an outlier among U.S. school and mass shootings. Why is that? Let me ask you this first. When was the last time you heard that the shooter was a girl? Women and girls are far less likely to carry them out as compared to male attackers, with studies basically showing only about 3% of all U.S. mass shootings are perpetrated by females. In fact, according to the Madison police chief, identifying a motive is their top priority, but at this time, it appears that the motive was a combination of factors, quote unquote. Investigators are examining the girl's cell phone, computer, online posts, court records reportedly showing that the 15-year-old girl had a turbulent home life and that her parents divorced and remarried multiple times and that she had been enrolled in therapy. Police said Rapno used a pistol but have not yet said how it was obtained. President Joe Biden, in a statement, called the shooting shocking. He urged the Congress to act immediately. I'm quoting from his words. Every child deserves to feel safe in their classroom. He goes on to say, students across our country should be learning how to read and write, not having to learn how to duck and cover. Absolutely, Mr. President, bang on. But haven't the students in America been doing exactly that all this while? It's a nightmare playing on loop day in and day out. According to the Washington Post school shooting tracker, over 31,000 children have been affected by a shooting on a K-12 campus during school hours this year alone. According to it, 21, that's the number of states where school shootings have taken place this year, in addition to the District of Columbia. School shootings have become a near daily occurrence in the United States, with 322 of them this year, according to the K-12 school shooting database. That's the second highest total of any year since 1966, topped only by last year's total of 349. School shootings once again bringing the focus back to gun control. The nerves of parents whose children are growing up, accustomed, unfortunately, to doing active shooter drills in their classrooms. Can you imagine what that's like? But then school shootings have done very little to actually move the needle as far as national gun laws are concerned. You know what the Dane County executive, Melissa Agard, said at Tuesday's press conference? She wanted to see stricter gun laws in Wisconsin. She said, I'm quoting, "Let us remember this fact. Gun violence is the #1 killer of children in this country." She went on to say that's a legacy we cannot accept. Her words stuck with me. How is it okay for gun violence to be the #1 killer of children in any country? Imagine the fear that students are living through on a daily basis, that they will be sitting in their class and a shooting can happen any second. How scary, right? And it's high time that changed. Shifting focus in a significant step in the India and China relationship, Ajit Doval, the National Security Advisor of India, met the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Beijing to discuss the India-China border issue. The meeting between the leaders took place as part of the 23rd meeting of special representatives. There was no special representative dialogue in the last 5 years, given the Eastern Ladakh border row. Ajit Doval arrived in Beijing on Tuesday for the new edition of India and China's Special Representatives Dialogue. At the end of the meeting, both sides agreed on a 6-point consensus, including resumption of Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, cross-border river cooperation, and the Nathula border trade. Both sides reiterated that the implementation work should continue on the solution reached between the two countries on border issues. They also reaffirmed their commitment to continue seeking a mutually acceptable package solution to the boundary issue. The consensus also included further refining the management and control rules in the border area and strengthening confidence-building measures. The two sides also agreed to continue to strengthen cross-border exchanges and cooperation, including promoting resumption of Indian pilgrimage to Tibet, China. Cross-border river cooperation and Nathula border trade also agreed upon was the strengthening of the construction of the special representatives meeting mechanism. Further, the sides agreed to hold a new round of special representatives meeting in India next year. In his address at a symposium on the international situation and China's foreign relations in 2024 on Tuesday, the Chinese foreign minister said that the two sides agreed to step up strategic communication, safeguard peace and tranquility in the border areas, and strive to bring the bilateral relationship between the two countries back to the track of stable development at an early date. Chinese ambassador to India reiterated that China is ready to bring bilateral relations of the two countries back on track. He added that it is important for both countries to respect each other's core interests and work accordingly. Both countries completed disengagement process from the last two friction points of Demchok and Depsang in Ladakh under an agreement finalized in October this year. The agreement was finalized just days before Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping held talks on the sidelines of the BRICS summit in the Russian city of Kazan.